All right, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Heather Metcalf, Chief Research Officer for the Association for Women in Science and PI for the ARC Network. I'd like to thank you all for registering for this fourth installment of the ARC Network webinar series. Before we begin, I would like to take care of just a few housekeeping items. First, I want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available to everyone who registered. We'll also be uploading the recording in the ARC Network online community platform library, which you'll learn a lot more about today. As a short introduction to our webinar platform, which is Zoom, I'd like to point out just a couple of useful features for the app. So first, if you hover your mouse over the bottom of the Zoom window, you'll see a number of different menu options that become visible. In the bottom left side of the screen, you can adjust your microphone and video settings, including muting, unmuting, turning your video on and off. In the bottom middle part of the screen, you'll see menu options for question and answer, chat, raising your hand, and more. We have started the webinar by placing everyone on mute, and we ask that if you have any questions about Zoom or you experience any technical difficulties, that you please use the chat function to let us know. That way we can reserve any questions that you have for our presenter for the Q&A function of the platform. Sometimes people mix it up. We have some moderators to help sort that out if we need to. But if you could help us by trying to use the two functions separately, that would be great. We will also address questions directed to the presenter at the end of the speaker's presentation. Second, I wanted to share a little bit about the ARC Network. The goal of the ARC Network is to create and cultivate a broad community that bridges the gap between researchers and practitioners. As the STEM Equity Brain Trust, the ARC Network works to promote systemic change by collecting previous work and producing new perspectives, methods, and interventions. The ARC Network is funded by the National Science Foundation's Advance Program, and the Association for Women in Science serves as the backbone organization for this project. To learn more about the ARC Network, we encourage you to visit equityandstem.org, where you can also join the community if you haven't already. Through our online community hosted by Elsevier on their Mendeley platform, we provide a space for researchers, practitioners, and other change agents to engage in critical dialogue and share resources, including research, promising practices, training materials, data sets, and more in the ARC Network resource library. While we on the ARC Network team will continuously curate critical resources for the community and share them in the library, we also encourage all ARC Network members to do the same. Now, a little bit more about why we're here today. Today's session will take us on a tour of the online community and the resource library, led by the one and only Aspen Russell. Aspen is Research Assistant with AWIS, where I have the really great privilege of working with them as they study equity in STEM workplaces, including the academy. Aspen's research is founded on an intersectional framework and aims to bridge the gap between academics, practitioners, and change makers. They have an undergraduate degree in computer science and a minor in women's gender and sexuality studies from American University. They've also worked in the tech industry in advancing equipment manufacturing, software creation, and co-founded a nonprofit dedicated to researching and engineering solar-powered vehicles. They've also explored bias in language and media communications. As a first-generation queer scholar, Aspen is dedicated to intentional and inclusive research methods with a focus on engaging allies. Aspen, please take it away.
All right, I also want to extend my thanks both to Heather for being my co-host and for all the folks who have signed up and are watching right now. I think the process of fielding some questions about this platform on email, as well as meeting a bunch of folks in the community convening, has really informed what this webinar will be, as well as sitting through a bunch of other Mendeley webinars that you don't have to watch instead of this one. So I hope this is informative, answers a lot of your questions, and really makes sure that this platform is here to catalyze your research and your collaborations and your connection and discovery with the platform. So without further ado, actually, I think, Heather, it's a good time to start the poll. I think a great way for me to contextualize what we're doing is to put out a poll to see what your background is. Are you a practitioner? Are you a researcher? Are you both? Are you a change maker? How you identify in this space, so I can kind of hopefully tailor some of the aspects to it. We'll just give a moment for that.
All right, everybody that's on the app has answered the poll.
Wow, immediate
So
participation.
There's our results.
Okay, so we've got 40% identifies researcher, 20% is practitioners, 40% is change agents, and 20% is something else. All right. Thank you for that. It's really great to know who we're working with and who we're participating with. I think one of the best things, having been a part of consortiums and other groups, is that they tend to be very academic focused. And I hope one of the things that shines with ARC Network is that it is change maker, practitioner, and academic focused, and the relationships between the three. All right, let's get going. All right, so let's just start up from the beginning. Some of you may have signed up for the equityinstem.org ARC Network. You may have already had a Mendeley account, have the desktop application, and have already been interacting with the resources. But we're going to take a step back to contextualize why we're using Mendeley, what Mendeley is, and how we envision it being used for our community. So the first question to be asked is, what is Mendeley? Mendeley is a bunch of things. In a more standard and traditional sense, it is a reference manager. So when you do have your citations that you want to collate, your bibliographies, it has some plugins, and it makes life a lot easier when you are writing a document, right? But also does a couple of other things, which is part of why we chose this platform. A big part is that there is the reference manager as its own piece of software and its own feature. But there's also an online community. This online community is made up of a few things, but one of the things we're really pushing for is that we have this private group that is the ARC Network, which is a catalog and an archive of equity resources, the history as much as we can get of advanced research, but also going more broadly than that. It's a place where you can have your professional profile, where you can follow folks that you are either a collaborator with, people that you want to collaborate with, and it's just really great to say, I'm in a private group called ARC Network, and I know that every single member in this member directory is doing equity research. So I can either find new stuff or reach out to them directly. And then lastly, I'm going to highlight a lot of tools and functionality that may not seem as obvious, but can be really helpful if you are looking for new resources. So the discovery aspect is for discovering new folks to collaborate with. It's for discovering new resources you may not have heard of, as well as taking the full use of the feature set of this free tool set that we are offering in the ARC Network. All right, so now on to why Mendeley. So there's a few reasons. The ones that I've picked for this that aren't included in the longer discussion that we'll be having today are that by partnering with Mendeley, we are able to give you open access resources. So while it is a private group, which is why some of you, if you have searched for the ARC Network on your Mendeley account, it won't show up. It is invite only, but once you get there, all of the resources that we have cataloged, archived, tagged, and curated will be available to you and anyone that you refer to join the ARC Network. The second is that if you've used EndNote or you've used Zotero or if you've used other citation managers, usually the functionality is great, but it doesn't exactly inspire collaboration or make it easier to collaborate necessarily. So one of the big things is the online community, as well as some of the tools I'll show you of how you can take the resources, citations, and documents and actually collaborate with them all in one platform. So you're not opening up different software, you're not having to open up Google Docs as well as your citation manager, finding different plugins. There's a lot of great feature sets that really do inspire a lot of collaboration. And then lastly, it's free. This was one of the things we really wanted to fight for. If we're thinking about ARC Network living longer than a couple of years, it's just not sustainable to ask for fees or other barriers to entry to the folks who are using this platform. So being free for everyone is a really big deal. All right, like I said, folks are going to be across the board, I imagine, as far as where they are in this setup process. But meeting folks at the community, convening and fielding a lot of the Q&A over email. I know that there are aspects of the sign-up process that are confusing, so I'm hoping we can just start from the beginning and work our way through to the more advanced aspects of the platform. So the Reference Manager, the Mendeley platform, is a 3-step process. The first step being involved with ARC Network, and we can go there first. So equityandstem.org is the ARC Network's website. And the idea behind this is that if you go to equityandstem.org, in the top right corner that you can see here, the big orange button is Join the Community. And I've heard some questions about why isn't Mendeley just equityandstem.org? Why isn't the Reference Manager hosted on equityandstem.org? And I think it'll become a little bit more clear if I explain what the ARC Network is briefly. So when you join the ARC Network community, so by going to equityandstem.org, clicking that button and filling out this information, you get added into our database. And when you're in our database, it gives you access to the full breadth of ARC Network resources, which is not just the library. Some other things are virtual visiting scholars. So if you want access to their webinars or looking at their reference lists and bibliographies, or you want to apply to be one, you need to be a member of the ARC Network. If you want to join the Emerging Research Workshop, if you are part of the community convening, or you want to be a part of the next community convening, or you want to use the library, it all starts on equityandstem.org. So it's really just a jumping off point so that we know who you are and we can connect you to the resources that we already have. So if you haven't already done that, imagine you have if you're on this webinar, but that is absolutely the first step to not just get the library, but to get the whole suite of features that we're trying to get to the folks in this community. The next step is to create a Mendeley account. And this is a separate website with a separate account creation process. I will definitely advocate for using the same email address. When you do sign up on equityandstem.org, whatever email is processed there will send the invite out on Mendeley. So if you use 2 different email addresses, you'll just have to ping AWIS and we'll send a new invite, but it's a little more streamlined if you use the same email for both platforms. Yeah, so that should be pretty simple. Mendeley.com, create your account if you already have one. It'd be awesome if you could just send us your email or sign up on equityandstem.org so you don't have to recreate all of your publications and professional profile and everything. But step 1, equityandstem.org. Step 2, create your Mendeley account. Now, in theory, if you've done both of those steps, you should be able to navigate to groups. In Mendeley, this is one of my favorite parts about Mendeley, is the groups. So ARC Network is what's called a private group. So it is invitation only. However, there are numerous other types of groups that we can get into, some that I've joined and I would recommend, but it just really bolsters your ability to find your resources. But once you are under your groups, after creating your profile, you should have an invitation from the ARC Network, and we'd love if you clicked accept. Because once you do click accept, you should see this page. So it's very ResearchGate meets LinkedIn in the sense that you have a social media feed, but it is very focused on practitioner resources, academic resources, and change-making resources, right? So you have your stereotypical feed where you can create a post. You can use @ just like Twitter if you want to ask a specific question. Let's say you visited a presentation at the community convening and you wanted to ask a question to that person that you find pertinent, you can easily @ them and start that conversation on the feed. The library is also online in this web platform. I would add the caveat, in my experience, that the online library acts more as like a read-only version, where you can add documents, you can search documents, you can download PDFs, but you can't really go into the details, edit things, especially if you see mistakes or you want to do some collaborative work. But we'll get into that a little bit later. A few other features that are really great is looking at the member directory. Again, like I said earlier, one of the best things about putting together a social network that's free and open is that you can easily scroll through and find those folks that you want to connect with, that you want to follow, that you want to get notifications if they're producing research or putting out calls for different research projects or doing a workshop or something like that. All right. And here's what I alluded to just a couple slides ago. So Gender in a Global Research Landscape is a public group. So a lot of institutions, academic, industry, nonprofit, they will create their own public groups, and they can be joined by anyone. And the great thing about public groups, just like private groups, is that you get access to a curated library that is very specific. So this one being a gender lens, with the focus being on global research, right? And when you get into your desktop manager for your references, we'll see this later, but just as a teaser, you'll have access to those libraries that you can pull specific resources into your personal library. And once you have them into your personal library, you can organize them how you want, you can annotate them how you want, you can invite people to edit with you, read with you, whatever you want. I would just highly recommend, outside of the ARC network, also joining some other relevant public groups, because they are a really great resource. So we're actually going to highlight a co-PI of the ARC network, Joan Herbers, who is an accomplished academic, and I thought that their social profile would be a great thing to highlight, as well as just to give you an example of, someone who's really invested time in linking all of their publications to Mendeley. I also put it out there that if your publications are through Science Director Scopus, Mendeley has a partnership with them, so any of the three will be really easy to link to your profile. The other ones might have some import issues, which can be addressed manually, but it's usually a pretty seamless process to add publications to your profile. So a few things to point out as far as your social page is concerned is there's the stereotypical things like your academic history, your work history, but the real key aspect is your publication list. We'll go into this later, but you can actually verify that a publication is yours. And this will open the ability, one, to have it attached to your professional profile for others to see, to follow, and to read, but also give you impact metrics. So before we go into impact metrics, you have your co-author list, so it'll automatically scan your publications and pull up those people to broaden your network, as well as to suggest to other folks who might be doing similar work and to get you into the rabbit hole of finding new networks and connections. So just something to browse and take in. So like I alluded to, you do have some analytics that you have access to. So media mentions, total citations, citations per year, it can really break down in a lot of different ways. But it's a very easy and accessible way to see, given a year that you produced something, maybe you joined the ARC network and you highlighted a piece of your research at a community convening and you want to see if it had some output. There's really great ways to track how your articles are being read and how they're being used. And it's all integrated as long as they populate in your readership list. There's also an H-index that you can look into how that's calculated if that's of interest to you. So another feature set that's a part of your professional profile if you do choose to fill that out. And you can also follow others and check their statistics as well.
Aspen, can you go back a slide?
Sure.
Thanks. One thing that I'll add to what Aspen just mentioned is that a lot of these things sound very researcher oriented, and some of them are, like an H-index in certain kind of academic publications that are filtered through a Scopus database. But there are also elements in here, including within your profile, where you can add non-academic peer-reviewed journal publications. You can add certain kinds of resources, training materials, things of that nature that can also be tracked in terms of this readership diagram that Aspen has at the bottom, and also certain kinds of media mentions if you're trying to publicize more widely than just a peer-reviewed journal audience. So I just wanted to point that out for the practitioners who are among our viewers today.
Absolutely. Great point. All right. So this is something that was new to me recently, but you have the opportunity to, and this is part of the discovery aspect, to allow Mendeley to see what's in your library or to look at your publication list that is in your professional profile and allow it to create a curated list of reading material, literature, or what have you. And this is called the Mendeley Digest. If you go under your account settings and notifications, you can check the box or uncheck the box if you don't want it. I do know that if one of your primary goals is to find new research, adding the ARC network and starting to curate your own library will really be helpful with getting this digest in weekly or monthly to kind of broaden your horizons as far as what's available to you on the platform. And it's easily one click from the email to add that resource into your personal library to look at later, mark to read, whatever you want. So that's an extra setting or feature that if you want to turn on, you absolutely can. Just wanted to make sure that folks are aware of it. All right, so now we are in step 3 of the full, sign up process. So we first signed up for the ARC network on the equityandstem.org website. Then we made an account on Mendeley and explored the social aspects of the, excuse me, of the website. And the last part is to download the desktop application. And so the real key to the desktop application is that it provides the full feature set. Like I said, the online library is great for referencing, looking at articles and citing articles, but it lacks a lot of the editing features, and you can't really dig into your personal library. You really just get to see your group libraries with limited features, right? So when you enter your feed for the first time, or for me, it's every single day, there will be an ad to download the Mendeley app. If you don't see it, I will be posting a resource list of where you can download these things, find short tutorials on how to use the plugins that we're going to go over, anything that we really didn't have time for today. They'll be linked after we're done. I do want to make a note. I've been talking to Mendeley about their platform, working through some stuff, and I found out that they do have a new application called the Mendeley Reference Manager. It appears to be in a beta form. It's not linked anywhere that I've seen on their website. So there's the desktop application, which I would recommend downloading. It's more tried and true, and it's more stable. But if you do want to try a new product that lacks some of the features, but definitely has some new ones as well, I will link that as well and make the distinction. But for the purposes of this webinar, we'll be digging into the current version. And if the newer version of the Reference Manager gets updated, we will update this webinar to reflect that, to go through the new feature sets that are offered when an official release happens. But if you see two different downloads, the desktop application is the one we're going with for right now. All right, so you're an ARC Network member, you're on the website, and now you open up your desktop application for the first time. You should have a few things. I just wanted to go over what it would look like when you first opened up the desktop browser. It's very stereotypical. If you've used Zotero or other reference managers, it definitely mimics that aesthetic and the functionality at first. So on the left-hand side, it's very folder tree structure oriented. And I do want to make the point that you have your library, my library, where local things can be saved as well as backed up to the cloud. When you are searching, it is all folder dependent. So when you use the big search bar in the top right, if you're in your all documents, it only search in all documents, not in your groups or private groups or public groups that are there. And we're going to dig into a couple other unique features on this next slide. So the first thing I'd imagine you'd want to do, the first thing I did when I downloaded the desktop application was to import my own files. If you want Mendeley to be your primary citation and reference manager, you're going to import from other places. So just as a heads up, PDFs for drag and drop, either you can do folders or individual or multiple. You can search on your browser and drag and drop, or you can just search and import individually, whatever your preference is. The currently supported bibliography files are BibTeX, EndNote, RIS, and Zotero. So if you have those, absolutely import them in. It's very easy. If you don't, most other programs will export to BibTeX, EndNote, RIS, or Zotero. So you can import to one or export to one and then import that other one into Mendeley. It's kind of a two-step workaround, but it's a lot easier than manually importing. So highly, highly suggest that. One feature that is a little different than just importing your files that I found on Mendeley is the highlighted My Publications. So like I talked about earlier, you have the ability to have your professional profile. And the way that you get your PDFs or your publications onto that list, or at least an easy way, is by drag and dropping them into the My Publications. Mendeley will ask you for a short verification process. And once you clear that, it'll be uploaded into an open access database so people can search for it, as well as it'll be listed underneath your professional profile. And you can start the tracking for your citations and viewerships or whatever you really want to get out of it, media mentions, etc. So those are two things that I think are really key as far as your first imports and your first profile building activities. Just want to reiterate that Mendeley plus ScienceDirect and Scopus, so when you are importing, those are great ways to either go to their publisher websites and one-click import is a really great feature, or the metadata should be pretty perfect if you are importing from those places as well. One other feature for this page anyway is the ability to right-click any of your folders, either in a private group, public group, or your personal library, and you can watch it. And when you watch a folder, it just means that if something is deleted, added, annotations are made, you're going to get a notification. So if you create a private group to work on a research project with your colleagues, you might want to watch a certain folder. to know that someone has finished editing a document or annotating it or has added something new for you to read. Really great feature just to get notifications specifically when a folder is being edited. Couple feature sets and plugins that I did want to point out. There are two, a web plugin and a Word plugin. Again, I have some short tutorials that are like 2 or 3 minutes. They'll be linked after this. So I'm just going to give a brief overview. If you want to do it, you'll have access to it. If you don't, then that's totally fine as well. So Mendeley has a browser plugin, works with Safari, Chrome, and Firefox. That once installed, if you're browsing a publisher's website and you want to add a reference to your library, it's a one-click process. And I've used other reference managers that do this. Something new that Mendeley does is if it's optimized with the publisher, it can actually give you recommendations while you're importing the reference. So you'll have the reference at top that you're importing that it's scanned for, but below it, there'll be a bar that will be like, have you seen these articles, that you can also look on that publisher's website, which may be of use to you. So really great exploratory tool, very simple to install. So if that's up your alley, that is something that is offered on this platform. Next is the Word plugin. So if you use LibreOffice or you use Microsoft Word, Mendeley offers a plugin which will go into the ribbon once it is installed, and it allows you to do a few things. If you want to import an entire bibliography, you can do that. Or if you want to do in-text citations or one-off citations as well. The basic process is that you'll open up the ribbon, you'll click Mendeley, it'll bring up a search box, a very generic one. You can type in the name of the article, it'll pop up and you click it, and then the citation in text or otherwise will be immediately imported. They support thousands of citation styles, so whichever one that you primarily use will probably be supported and be automatically populated when you do use that. So again, LibreOffice and Microsoft Office, it's cool that they do have a free software that you can integrate with. So again, tutorial will be, once we're done with this, posted on the Mendeley platform if that's something that you're interested in. All right, now we're going to get into general searching. So you've filled out your library, you may have added a publication or two to your professional profile, you should see the ARC network underneath your groups, and maybe you've joined a couple other public groups as well. So now we want to dig into the nitty-gritty of how to navigate this platform, especially if this is your first time using reference manager software. It can be a little intimidating. So the first few things I want to talk about are the top-level filters. So much like if you're using Windows Explorer or Viewer on Mac, you can sort by your authors, title here, published in, the added date, very, very standard stuff. The icons that I do want to point out, though, are the star for favoriting, pretty straightforward. Mark as read. So I create folders that are my to-do, right? So to read, to make sure that I need to sort them later, that I haven't vetted quite yet. So you can just toggle the green dot on or off to show that you've not read this thing or you have read this reference. That's pretty useful. Underneath the third from the left is that file icon. If there is a PDF symbol or another symbol underneath that column, that means that there is a copy of the document either locally saved or backed up to the cloud, and you're able to open it up, as we'll see later, to annotate and read. So we'll dig into that later, but that's just a way to know if a file has been attached or not. Lastly is to get into more advanced search terms. So like I said, search is local to whatever you have highlighted. So whether that's your private group, public group, personal library, or what have you, your search will only search within that group. You can search, if you click the magnifying glass, it'll give you some suggested words. When you do click these, it'll populate with a colon. There'll be authors, colon. Anything you search after that will only search your entire library under authors for that word. So if I was searching for something by Heather, it would be authors, colon, Metcalf, and then I would see any publication that has author listed as Metcalf. This is not an exhaustive list. One that I use quite often is actually abstract, colon, and then searching for a word that would appear in an abstract. So that's kind of a little advanced feature if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of searching. Otherwise, I would highly recommend underneath the ARC network group, there is a folder called help/guide. Underneath that, we have an ARC taxonomy. So as we get resources from awesome folks like you, We import them, and then we go through a custom tagging process that's all unified. And we'll go into the details pane a little bit later to give an example, but I find that as the easiest way to search because it's about the location and the setting, maybe an identity-based demographic that we're looking for, a discipline, and then is it an academic article? Is it a workshop document? Is it a methodologies document? Really great place for reference for how to search our group specifically. Another search feature is the literature search. So if you're just filling out your library and you know that you're on Mendeley Science Director Scopus, this might be the best way to simply search for your document and immediately add it to your library. So anything that Mendeley has access to, you can search their catalog right through this reference manager. So easy peasy to kind of do those searches. All right, so we have the navigation details pane. This one has a lot of information. And one of the key things is that as you are adding documents to the ARC Network private group, or you submit them to us and we upload them, and one of the use cases is if you see a mistake. Mendeley does occasionally leave out metadata. Maybe an abstract is missing, maybe the journal article or the journal title is wrong, or we don't have a PDF of the document missing. You can absolutely go in and edit those to match it. And there's also a notes section if you want anyone to have further context about the article that you feel is necessary. I will say if there is missing data and you don't want to go through the manual process, but you do have the DOI number, so under catalog IDs, you can simply put in the DOI, hit the magnifying glass, and it should auto-populate all of the metadata instantly. So that's a really great tool to use. As well as you can see, there are mostly URL links to publishers if that's the way you want to interact with the resource. So there's that. And then lastly, I want to make a note between the tags and the author keywords. The author keywords are populated by the author when they publish it, but the tags are what ARC staff are working with. So when I reference the ARC taxonomy, all of these words are curated for this group specifically. So if you do search for any of these, like I said, we're looking at an identity-based demographic. This one has gender. The discipline is engineering. The type of article is journal article. And we're talking about the subject matter is institutional culture and sense of belonging. So you'll see these themes reoccur. And they are, in my opinion, the fastest way to find something topical that is on the website. All right, so one of the last features that we'll talk about is the ability to annotate and collaborate. So you can open up, if there is a PDF either backed up to the cloud or it's locally stored on your computer, to pop it open, browser style. You can open as many as you need. And it has highlighting, sticky notes, commenting, all those features you would see in like a PDF editor with the awesome asterisks that you can collaborate. So if you create a private group for your research team, if I join, my color might be yellow, and then Heather joins to add some annotations and some notes, she'll get populated with a different color, right? So you can actually have multiple copies of this document in different places to work with different research groups, but it'll allow you to be in one platform, annotating, commenting, talking to each other the whole way through while you're reading or making a bibliography. So I haven't seen this before. I think it's a really great feature. Highly would recommend checking it out, creating your own private groups for your research teams, and keeping it all in one place so you don't have to download a million pieces of software, opening Google Docs, closing Google Docs, opening Word, exporting as a PDF, whatever you're doing. Hopefully this will condense that process. All right, so we are almost at the end of the tunnel, so we can get to the Q&A section. I do want to point out a couple of things. So Mendeley is fairly new as far as the ARC network using it. And what our vision is kind of threefold. The first thing is that we want to build a community, and we're already seeing a few steps in the right direction there. It's going to be your one-stop shop for posting of webinars like this to register for them. The recordings of webinars, like our past virtual visiting scholars webinars, are backed up for your viewership on that platform already. If you're thinking about the ARC community convening or the emerging research workshop, either attending to register, or you saw on day 2, session 3, you really loved a presentation, you want to get your hands on the slides, but you don't know how because you lost the person's card. Well, you can go in days after the conference has ended, and I've already uploaded all of the slide decks and ordered them by the date and session number. So not only can you find the resource, you can tag the resource, you can tag the person in the feed and ask some questions about it if you missed the Q&A session. So really great place, one-stop shop for everything that ARC Network is doing, as well as the ability to tag people and resources, which I think is an invaluable asset. So the next thing that we really envision are connecting with equity scholars and practitioners and change makers. Like I said, there's a member directory, there's the @ feature, and there's the ability to look at professional profiles, to tag people, to connect with people, to find out their people that they are publishing with, to see if they're proposing new research and need research partners or are looking for funding opportunities. When you look in our member directory, you know that every single person is involved with equity work, and that's a really amazing thing to have access to. So we hope that gets taken advantage of. Then lastly is the discovery aspect, either for you personally in your research group or as part of the ARC network. We are curating this history of equity research, but it's also a platform and jumping off point for you to join other public and private groups to take full advantage of the literature that is available all around. And I just want to highlight 2 examples that we've started seeing as things to look out for on the feed part of it, right? So on the left, yeah, we got this webinar, we know what it's about, and you can register, and it's kind of all in one. And we can also tag resources. So if you know, I had literature that I wanted to highlight, I could just tag it right there and you could read about it. And then on the right, we have one of our ARC network members who is posting about something happening at their institution. They included their bylaws rubric, and then we had folks who are interacting in the comments below. So I just wanted to end this webinar and thank you all for joining and participating in some of the nitty-gritty and technical aspects, but also some of the inspiration and vision that we do have for this platform. So thank you for joining, and I'm more than open to Q&A, and if I can't answer it, I will do the work of asking Mendeley. So thank you.
Thank you, Aspen. We don't have any questions in the Q&A box, but I will open it up to anyone who is signed into the webinar who would like to add a question in there for you. One question that I have that I can start with for you is you mentioned that you added all of the resources from our October Equity and STEM community convening. Would you be able to share your screen and show the folks who are on this webinar where that lives?
Sure. Let me scroll through all of my open tabs and find the correct place. All right. Okay. Okay, so you should be seeing the Mendeley desktop application now. And what we're going to do is we're going to look in the top left corner, and there you will see groups. It's kind of a scroll down. It's not very obvious, but if you've joined the ARC Network group on the Mendeley website, this should populate automatically when you do open up the desktop application. So underneath there, you can see that we have a couple of topical segments like bias and bibliographies. This is the help and guide, which has our taxonomy and a paper guide version of some of the tips and tricks and features of Mendeley, if that's of use to you. We can also see that we have the 2019 ARC community convening. So when you do select a folder, you get the top-down view of everything, but you can sort by Monday. And maybe I was in the Calypso room on Monday, and you'll have right here, you can see that there is a icon which indicates that there is a file here, as well as the title, the authors, if they had an abstract, and then the tagging will happen. But yeah, it should all be there, and if you're an attendee, it's sorted exactly how you experienced it, so it should be pretty seamless to find the authors that you want to talk to, or the resource that will be linked there, PowerPoint or printouts or whatever floats your boat. So it should be there.
Thanks, Aspen. Now we have a few questions in the Q&A. So the first one is from Rodika Lisnick, who you just had on the screen earlier as one of the presenters at the community convening. And she's wondering about how to actually log into the ARC network. She says she has an account but can't find the login. And I think you kind of indicated a little bit about that at the beginning of the call, but maybe going back through. And I'm going to unmute you, Radhika, so that way if you want to ask follow-up questions while Aspen walks through this, you can.
Sure. Let me go back to my slides. I think we're going to go back. All right, so I think the question is asking you create an account or what looks like an account on the ARC Network website, equityandstem.org. And then there's the Mendeley platform, which is over here. So when you create an account on the ARC Network, what you're really doing is giving us your information, so your email and your name. So that goes into our database, so we can send you emails and other information and process your registration for events. It's not a typical account registration in that you log in and then you have a feature set like you're accessing a member profile or anything like that. So when you do sign up for the ARC network, it's really just giving us your information to get connected and process registration. Whereas the Mendeley account is a separate registration process, right? So you go on Mendeley.com, you create an account and you log into something, which you don't do on the equityandstem.org website. So you have to create that second account on Mendeley.com, and the ARC network group invitation should be populated there if we have your email. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
Aspen.
No problem.
Yeah, I tried multiple times to log in, and I was confused, but because you mentioned something about there are resources on the ARC network that are not available for non-members. So I was wondering, like, if I don't log in, how do I access those resources? You know.
Gotcha. And yeah, and just to clarify, the exclusive resources that I was mentioning for ARC Network members are really about being able to sign up as a virtual visiting scholar, right? So when you submit an application or you try to process a registration, we need to see that you are in our database to process those types of things. It's not a login thing, it's just more like a checkbox thing to make sure you're signed up.
Okay, thank you, that makes sense.
No problem.
And if you continue to have trouble, just let us know and we can set up a time to help you get in there.
All right.
Okay, so the next question is from an anonymous attendee. Do you have an idea of what type of articles or materials are in the library so far? For example, the example on the screen had a rubric about language used in the tenure process. How would you go about searching for something like that?
All right, I'm going to take this opportunity to switch back over to screen sharing my Mendeley account so we can look at the taxonomy and just go briefly over our tagging procedure. Again, it's not just academic articles, it's really more of like a thematic search sequence. So I will go back over there. Okay, so we are back on the desktop application for Mendeley. We are navigating on the left-hand side to the groups underneath ARC Network and underneath Help and Guide. So when you do have our taxonomy, look at that. It's backed up to the cloud, so you can literally double-click it and it populates into a tab just like a browser. So this taxonomy was created by the PIs on ARC to make it as easy as possible to search unified, right? So to get an idea of what's on here would definitely fit underneath the tagging scheme. But like I said earlier, the example document that we had underneath the details pane, it's really about asking, what type of document is it? We have methodologies, metrics, whether it's evaluation. If it fits into practice, then it has its own subgroup. But also the barriers to equity. So thematically, what are we talking about? A lot of articles, that we've had imported lately are about leadership or about retention, right? So those are just some of the thematic ways that we can codify it. But if we go down further, We also have organizational settings, so you can search by if it was done in K through 12 or if it was done in undergrad or graduate, the workplace, nonprofit, and then even deeper if you're looking at HBCUs, MSIs, or other classifications of universities and colleges. And then if it's, from a different perspective, obviously K through 12, externships, faculty and professional development, going into discipline, and then we have our identity-based categories. So this is here for reference, and tags will usually go from one of each category if they're relevant, if not multiple from each category. So hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Aspen. It also seems like the person was asking about the specific example that you gave of the conversation that was happening within the Mendeley group about the bylaws rubric that was there. So if you were to do a search within the library for that, how would you do that so that person could locate that specific document?
Gotcha. Let's see. Well, it sounds like it was a university setting, so I definitely search for university. Then I would also add a tag, so you can do and to your tagging to look at maybe something under number 1, as far as it could be an assessment type document or policy. Promising practices under policy would probably bring it up and give you supplementary articles about critiques of certain policies or good examples of ones that we already have. And then definitely putting the barriers to equity, reading that statement and pulling out kind of what their focus was. Those are probably a few of the search terms that I would use to tag them and to search them working through the desktop application.
Thanks, Aspen. And I'll add that for me, I would actually even just search in the search bar after I've clicked on the library and look for rubric or look for tenure.
Yeah, there's quite a few of them.
The way the platform works is it will search all of the language that's in the entry. So whether it's a tag that we've created or it's language that's written into the abstract or written into the attached document, it'll search it for you. The other thing that I'll add to help answer this question is in terms of the type of articles and materials that are in Mendeley so far, in addition to this taxonomy that's here to help you look at that. Aspen, if you go back to the subset of folders that are under the ARC Network library, we also started to create a set of folders here on the left to organize certain kinds of content that have been most often requested, like interventions or bibliographies on a particular topic, different kinds of promising practices, where you can just see some of the stuff that we're starting to put in there just to make it a little easier for people to navigate. So I hope that that helps as you go in there and start to explore. Our next question is from Laureen Summers, who's fantastic. If you haven't met her, everyone should meet her. She's asking, is there any room for non-reviewed, non-professional articles to post that may encourage reactions or expanded thinking on some particular issue, like thinking about students with disabilities in the STEM environment, which is an article that she is in the process of writing. And Laureen, I'm going to also take you off of mute, so that way if you want to ask anything else of Aspen while she's talking about this, you can.
And my initial response, having personally gone through hundreds of these articles, is that these types of articles, especially the one that you're referencing, that you're writing, which one, awesome. Two, a lot of these things already exist in the ARC Network library. If you look at papers that were written for conferences that aren't hard STEM ones specifically, a lot of them do talk about these topics, as well as magazine articles are absolutely in here. Thought-provoking articles are absolutely in the ARC Network library. So my initial response is yes, and yes, please. And if Heather has any add-on to that, she can absolutely add her answer.
Yeah, I would agree with what you said. We very much encourage people to put this kind of content in here, which is why we have certain things around interventions and promising practices, as well as specific tags for different demographic categories like disability. So that way, if you're wanting to look for something that specifically talks about disability, whether it's a research article or it's something that's non-peer reviewed, maybe it's a set of tips for creating creating an accessible meeting environment, for example. You'll be able to find that. And another thing that I'll add that we'll get into in more detail in a different webinar is that we have a non-peer reviewed e-journal space on SSRN that's meant to bring together works in progress. So like this article that you're in the process of writing, where you can share it with a broader audience without having to go through the full peer review process before getting what you know out there to the community. Laureen, is there anything else that you want to add to this question? No? Okay. Thank you for it. Melissa Pasili, one of our STEM to Market entrepreneurs, and who also presented at the community convening, is asking about how to pair her account. So she has an old Mendeley account. Is there a way for her to pair them?
As far as I'm aware, the answer is no, but I can put in a ticket and talk to Mendeley and send that response out on the Mendeley feed, because I'm sure a lot of people have old Mendeley accounts. One thing I will say is that if you would prefer to use one account or the other, you can just ping someone at AWIS, me or Elizabeth Charay, and we can add an invite to whatever account you want. It's just easier for us logistically to use the same email that you gave in our database, but we can totally work through that if you have a preference.
Great. Another question from an anonymous attendee. Do we as users tag different documents in the library, or does someone else handle the tagging process?
Sure. So at this time, we are very grateful for the numerous resources folks are giving us, and we are taking on the tagging. It's just easier to unify if you have one or a couple people who are going through it. It's also labor that you don't have to do. So at this time, we definitely tag. If you want to give us resources, like email us exports from Risk or Zotero or EndNote, we can import those and tag them as we go. That's been our process so far.
Great. Let's see, and we have one hand raised here from Jean McLaughlin. Jean, I'm going to allow you to talk so you can ask your question.
Actually, I just hit the wrong button, so I'm fine.
Okay, okay. I'll put your hand down for you.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I have one more question for you, Aspen, since you have been working on importing so many different documents into the resource library. What are some of the existing libraries that you've been pulling in there from our community of practitioner partners?
Community practitioners.
So I'm thinking like SWE and the advanced portal that Peggy Lane has managed for a long time, those kinds of documents.
Yeah, I won't dig too deep because I do have my own folders with my own favorites and copies from the ARC network, which is something I highly recommend doing. I think what Laureen was saying earlier really struck a chord. Those are things that I've been reading a lot, especially with my advocacy and practitioner work that I do at AWIS, is looking at those articles that aren't going in journals. However, they do give you tips and tricks, promising practices, and great insight, critical insight that tells you to rethink the way that you've been approaching, maybe teaching a class or approaching a workshop or working with certain communities. I think those, and usually they're housed under intersectionality, wink, wink, shout out to intersectionality. But those ones are the ones that I would highly recommend searching, especially if you're unfamiliar with the concept or methodology. Again, we have walkthroughs and guides for how to implement it in an academic sense and in a practitioner sense. So to me, those ones are the ones that are really lighting up my neurons as of late.
That's great. Thank you. Any other questions from our attendees? All right. Well, thank you all so much for attending this webinar. And as we mentioned, the recording will be put up onto the Mendeley platform. And as Aspen mentioned, if anyone at any point in time has any difficulty navigating the online community or the library or going through the registration process, please do reach out to us. We want to help get you in there and make sure that you have access to all of these really great materials that we're building on and will continue to build on over the next several years. So thank you all.
Thank you.